The morning of September 15, 1940, dawns gray and ominous over the English Channel. In a cramped wooden hut perched along Britain's southeastern coast, 23-year-old radar operator Margaret Fletcher stares intently at a glowing screen covered in dancing green blips. Her headphones crackle with static as she adjusts the controls of a revolutionary device that most of the world has never heard of. What she sees on that primitive monitor will determine whether dozens of German bombers reach London undetected, or whether RAF fighters will be waiting to intercept them 100 miles from British soil. This is the story of how a small team of brilliant British engineers developed the most crucial defensive technology of the Second World War, turning invisible radio waves into Britain's electronic shield against aerial invasion. Just 18 months earlier, the concept of detecting aircraft using radio waves existed only in the minds of a handful of scientists scattered across government research facilities. Britain faced an unprecedented threat. German aircraft factories were producing modern bombers at an alarming rate, and traditional methods of aerial reconnaissance could barely provide 10 minutes of warning before enemy formations crossed the English coastline. Military planners calculated that hostile aircraft flying at typical cruising speeds would require at least 30 minutes advance notice for defending fighters to climb to intercepting altitude and position themselves effectively. The challenge seemed impossible to overcome using conventional observation methods. Robert Watson-Watt, a soft-spoken Scottish meteorologist working at the Radio Research Station, had spent years studying how radio signals bounced off atmospheric disturbances to track thunderstorms. His weather monitoring experiments revealed something extraordinary. Radio waves didn't just reflect off storm clouds and precipitation. They also produced distinct echoes when they encountered large metallic objects moving through the atmosphere. Watson-Watt realized that aircraft, with their aluminum fuselages and steel engine components, might create detectable radio signatures. The principle resembled shouting into a canyon and timing the echo's return, except instead of sound waves, this system would use carefully tuned radio pulses transmitted at specific frequencies. The mathematics proved both elegant and complex. Radio waves travel at the speed of light, covering roughly 186,000 miles per second. By measuring the precise time interval between transmitting a radio pulse and receiving its reflected echo, operators could calculate the exact distance to any reflecting object. If an aircraft was 50 miles away, the radio signal would complete its round trip in approximately 5/10,000ths of a second. Converting this theoretical framework into functioning equipment required solving numerous technical challenges. The radio transmitters needed sufficient power to send detectable signals across vast distances, while the receiving apparatus required extraordinary sensitivity to capture the faint echoes bouncing back from distant aircraft. Early prototype systems filled entire buildings with vacuum tubes, transformers, and cooling equipment that consumed enormous amounts of electrical power. Chain Home, Britain's revolutionary early warning network, began taking shape along the nation's vulnerable eastern and southern coastlines during 1938. These installations looked nothing like the sleek radar dishes that most people envision today. Instead, massive steel towers reaching heights of over 300 feet supported arrays of wire antennas that resembled giant radio broadcasting stations. The receiving towers, slightly shorter but equally imposing, captured the returning signals and fed them into sensitive detection equipment housed in concrete bunkers below. Each Chain Home station could detect aircraft formations at ranges approaching 100 miles under favorable atmospheric conditions. The system operated by continuously sweeping radio beams across assigned sectors of sky, much like a lighthouse beam rotating to illuminate different portions of the surrounding ocean. When aircraft entered the detection zone, trained operators would immediately observe new blips appearing on their cathode ray tube displays. The human element proved just as crucial as the technology itself. Operating these early radar systems required tremendous skill and concentration. The green phosphorescent screens showed abstract patterns of light that bore little resemblance to actual aircraft formations. Operators had to learn to distinguish between genuine aircraft contacts and false signals caused by weather phenomena, migrating birds, or atmospheric interference. A flock of seagulls could sometimes produce radar returns similar to a small group of fighters, while certain atmospheric conditions might create phantom contacts that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Training programs developed specialized techniques for interpreting radar displays. Experienced operators learned to estimate aircraft altitude by analyzing signal strength and echo characteristics. They could often determine approximate aircraft numbers by studying the size and intensity of radar contacts. Most remarkably, skilled personnel could sometimes distinguish between different aircraft types based on the unique radar signatures produced by various engine configurations and fuselage designs. The first major test of Chain-Home's capabilities came during the summer of 1940 as German air forces launched increasingly aggressive reconnaissance flights over British coastal areas. Radar operators began tracking these intrusions with remarkable accuracy, providing advance warning that allowed RAF squadrons to intercept hostile aircraft before they could complete their intelligence-gathering missions. Margaret Fletcher and operators like her across dozens of coastal stations found themselves on the front lines of an entirely new form of warfare. Their equipment hummed continuously, consuming vast amounts of electrical power while scanning the approaches to Britain around the clock. The psychological pressure was immense. A moment's inattention or a misinterpreted radar contact could mean the difference between successful interception and devastating bombing raids on British cities. By late August 1940, Chain-Home had proven its worth beyond any doubt. German bomber formations that previously could approach British targets virtually undetected now faced coordinated fighter opposition that seemed to anticipate their every move. What German pilots didn't understand was that their aircraft had become visible to British defenders long before they crossed the English Channel, tracked by an invisible electronic net that stretched across hundreds of miles of coastline. The technical challenges facing Watts & Watts engineering teams went far beyond simply bouncing radio signals off distant aircraft. Creating a reliable early warning network required solving dozens of interconnected problems that had never been tackled before in the history of electronics. Chief among these obstacles was the issue of signal clarity. Radio waves traveling through the atmosphere behave much like light passing through water. They bend, scatter, and weaken as they encounter different layers of air at varying temperatures and humidity levels. Engineer Patricia Coleman, working at the Bawdsey Research Station, spent countless hours calibrating the massive transmitter arrays to compensate for these atmospheric distortions. Her logbooks from 1939 reveal the painstaking process of adjusting transmission frequencies and power levels to achieve consistent detection ranges under different weather conditions. The physical construction of Chain-Home stations presented equally daunting challenges. Each installation required 4 steel transmission towers rising over 300 feet into the air, structures tall enough to be visible from 20 miles away on a clear day. These towering masts had to withstand hurricane-force winds while maintaining precise alignment with their counterparts at neighboring stations. Construction crews working through the harsh winter of 1939 battled freezing temperatures and limited supplies to erect these electronic sentinels along Britain's vulnerable coastline. Inside the radar huts themselves, operators like Margaret Fletcher worked in conditions that would challenge even experienced technicians. The powerful transmitters generated enormous amounts of heat, making the cramped spaces uncomfortably warm even during cold winter months. banks of vacuum tubes, each one roughly the size of a large light bulb, glowed continuously as they amplified the faint echo signals returning from distant aircraft. These glass tubes were notoriously fragile, and a single failure could blind an entire radar station at the worst possible moment. The mathematical precision required to interpret radar data demanded exceptional skill from operators who often had no formal electronics training. When radio waves struck an aircraft and bounced back to the receiving station, they carried information about the target's distance, direction, and approximate size, but only if the operator could correctly decode the patterns appearing on the oscilloscope screen. Distance calculations required split-second timing measurements, since radio waves travel at the speed of light. An aircraft 100 miles away would produce an echo signal returning to the radar station in roughly 1,000th of a second after the initial transmission. Squadron leader James Morrison, responsible for training radar operators at the secret facility in Dundee, developed innovative teaching methods to help personnel master these complex calculations under extreme pressure. His training scenarios involved tracking multiple aircraft simultaneously while German jamming equipment filled the airwaves with electronic noise designed to confuse British radar systems. Morrison discovered that operators with musical backgrounds often excelled at distinguishing genuine aircraft echoes from electronic interference, apparently because their trained ears could detect subtle audio patterns that others missed entirely. The integration of radar data with existing air defense systems required creating entirely new communication networks linking coastal stations with RAF fighter bases scattered across southern England. Information about incoming German formations had to travel from radar operators to sector stations, then to individual fighter squadrons, all within minutes of initial detection. This communication chain involved dozens of personnel at multiple locations, each relay point introducing potential delays or errors that could compromise the entire defensive response. Flight Lieutenant Sarah Hamilton, stationed at the Biggin Hill Sector Station during the height of the Battle of Britain, described the intense coordination required to transform raw radar contacts into effective fighter interceptions. Her plotting room featured a massive table map of southeastern England, where teams of personnel used colored markers to track both friendly and enemy aircraft movements in real time. Radio telephonists maintained constant contact with radar stations along the coast, updating aircraft positions every few minutes as German formations approached British airspace. The psychological impact of radar technology extended far beyond its immediate military applications. For the first time in warfare, defending forces could observe enemy movements from vast distances without risking reconnaissance aircraft or human observers. This electronic omniscience fundamentally changed the nature of aerial combat, transforming what had previously been reactive scrambles into carefully planned interceptions based on advanced intelligence. German bomber crews initially struggled to understand why British fighters seemed to find them so consistently, even when approaching under cover of darkness or through heavy cloud formations. Luftwaffe intelligence analysts proposed various theories to explain this apparent prescience, ranging from enhanced visual observation networks to sophisticated acoustic detection systems. The true nature of British radar capabilities remained one of the war's most closely guarded secrets throughout 1940 and well into 1941. Technical improvements to chain home continued throughout the early war period as engineers identified weaknesses in the original design. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, working at the Telecommunications Research Establishment, developed enhanced signal processing techniques that dramatically improved radar accuracy when tracking low-flying aircraft. Her innovations involved analyzing the Doppler shift in returned radio signals, the same principle that causes an ambulance siren to change pitch as it passes by. Aircraft moving toward or away from radar stations produced subtle frequency changes in their echo signals, providing operators with crucial information about target speed and direction. The manufacturing challenges associated with producing radar equipment on a wartime scale tested British industrial capacity to its limits. Each radar station required hundreds of specialized electronic components that had never been mass-produced before 1939. Vacuum tube production alone demanded establishing entirely new manufacturing facilities staffed by workers learning precision glass-blowing techniques traditionally used only in research laboratories. Factory supervisor Michael Thompson, overseeing radar component production in Manchester, coordinated the efforts of nearly 2,000 workers producing electronic equipment around the clock. His facility consumed more electrical power than some small cities while operating furnaces hot enough to shape the specialized metals used in radar transmitters. Quality control standards were extraordinarily demanding since a single defective component could render an entire radar installation useless during critical battle conditions. The strategic implications of successful radar development extended far beyond the immediate defense of British airspace. Allied military planners recognized that similar technology could revolutionize naval warfare by detecting enemy ships at unprecedented distances, regardless of visibility conditions. Coastal radar stations quickly demonstrated their ability to track German naval vessels attempting to approach British shores under cover of darkness or adverse weather. By the spring of 1941, Chain Home had evolved from an experimental early warning system into the foundation of Britain's integrated air defense network, proving that innovative engineering combined with exceptional human dedication could transform the fundamental nature of modern warfare. The success of Britain's radar network depended entirely on the skilled operators who transformed cryptic electronic signals into actionable intelligence. Flight Sergeant James Morrison crouched behind his plotting table at RAF Biggin Hill on a fog-shrouded October morning in 1940, surrounded by a maze of telephone lines connecting his operations room to radar stations scattered across Kent and Sussex. The green baize surface before him was covered with wooden markers representing incoming aircraft formations, their positions updated every few minutes as radar operators telephoned fresh coordinates from their remote coastal installations. Morrison's responsibility extended far beyond simply tracking enemy aircraft positions. He had to interpret radar contacts that frequently appeared as nothing more than faint smudges on cathode ray tube displays, distinguishing between genuine bomber formations and false signals created by flocks of migrating birds or atmospheric interference. The psychological strain was enormous. German bomber crews had begun employing sophisticated deception tactics, flying circuitous routes and splitting into smaller formations to confuse British radar operators. A single misidentification could result in RAF fighters being vectored toward non-existent targets while real enemy bombers approached their objectives undetected. The technical limitations of early radar equipment demanded extraordinary skill from operators working under combat conditions. Radar signals weakened dramatically with distance, meaning that aircraft flying at extreme range appeared as barely perceptible dots that flickered in and out of visibility on primitive display screens. Weather conditions significantly affected radar performance, with heavy rain or snow creating a cascade of false contacts that could overwhelm inexperienced operators. Training programs developed at RAF Cranwell taught radar personnel to distinguish between genuine aircraft signatures and meteorological phenomena. But this knowledge came only through months of intensive practice under expert supervision. Equipment reliability remained a constant concern throughout the Battle of Britain and beyond. The massive transmitter tubes used in chain home installations generated tremendous heat and required frequent replacement, often during the most critical periods of aerial combat. Technical Sergeant William Hughes spent the winter of 1940 traveling between radar stations along the Yorkshire coast, carrying spare electronic components and performing emergency repairs on installations that had suffered equipment failures or battle damage. His maintenance logs reveal the extraordinary efforts required to keep Britain's radar network operational despite component shortages and the constant threat of German bombing attacks on radar installations themselves. German intelligence services gradually recognized the existence of Britain's radar network through careful analysis of RAF fighter deployment patterns. By late 1940, German bombing missions began specifically targeting the tall transmission towers that marked chain-home installations, forcing British engineers to develop rapid repair techniques and backup communication systems. Radar operators learned to continue tracking enemy formations even when their primary equipment was damaged, using secondary receivers and improvised antenna arrays to maintain surveillance coverage during equipment repairs. The expansion of radar coverage beyond the original chain-home network created new operational challenges that required innovative solutions from field personnel. Mobile radar units deployed to protect naval bases and industrial centers operated with minimal technical support, forcing crew members to become experts in equipment maintenance and repair. Corporal Diana Mitchell commanded a mobile radar unit protecting the Rolls-Royce engine factory at Derby, working with a crew of 6 technicians who had learned to diagnose equipment problems using nothing more than voltmeters and spare parts carried in their transport vehicles. Night operations placed additional demands on radar crews who worked in complete darkness to avoid attracting enemy attention. The glow from cathode ray tube displays had to be carefully shielded to prevent German reconnaissance aircraft from identifying radar installation locations. Operators developed techniques for reading radar displays using minimal lighting, memorizing the positions of critical controls to avoid fumbling in darkness during emergency situations. Sleep deprivation became a serious problem as radar stations maintained continuous operations throughout the war, with crews working 12-hour shifts under conditions of extreme mental concentration. The integration of radar intelligence with fighter direction required seamless coordination between multiple organizations operating under intense time pressure. Squadron leader Robert Barnes supervised the filter room at RAF Bentley Priory, where radar reports from dozens of coastal stations were combined into a comprehensive picture of enemy air activity over northwestern Europe. His team of plotters worked with mechanical calculators and slide rules to predict enemy aircraft courses and intercept points, translating raw radar data into tactical instructions that were transmitted to RAF fighter squadrons within minutes of initial detection. Combat experience revealed unexpected limitations in radar technology that required immediate field modifications. High-altitude German reconnaissance aircraft operating above 30,000 feet frequently escaped detection by chain-home installations optimized for tracking bomber formations at medium altitudes. Technical teams developed supplementary high-frequency radar units specifically designed for detecting aircraft operating at extreme altitudes, deploying these specialized systems at strategic locations along the British coast by the summer of 1941. The psychological impact of radar technology extended far beyond its immediate tactical applications. German bomber crews reported feeling constantly observed and vulnerable when approaching British targets, never knowing whether RAF fighters were already vectoring toward intercept positions. This uncertainty forced German air units to adopt defensive flying formations and circuitous approach routes that reduced their operational efficiency and bombing accuracy. British radar had succeeded in transforming the fundamental dynamics of aerial warfare, giving defending fighters a decisive advantage that persisted throughout the conflict. Training programs for radar operators evolved continuously as combat experience revealed new techniques for maximizing equipment effectiveness. The Women's Auxiliary Air Force established specialized schools where operators learned to recognize the distinctive radar signatures produced by different types of aircraft, enabling them to provide fighter controllers with detailed information about enemy formation composition and probable intentions. These skills proved invaluable during major German air offensives, when accurate intelligence about enemy aircraft types determined the most effective RAF response tactics. By 1942, British radar technology had evolved from an experimental early warning system into the foundation of an integrated air defense network that protected not only the British Isles, but also Allied shipping convoys and overseas military installations. The dedication and expertise of radar operators like Morrison, Hughes, Mitchell, and thousands of others had transformed revolutionary scientific concepts into practical defensive capabilities that helped determine the outcome of the Second World War, establishing the technological foundation for modern electronic warfare systems that continue protecting nations around the world today. The transformation of radar technology from wartime necessity to peacetime innovation began almost immediately after German surrender in May 1945. Dr. Eleanor Whitfield, formerly a signals analyst at the Dover Chain Home Station, found herself reassigned to a converted aircraft hangar near Cambridge, where British engineers were exploring civilian applications for their revolutionary detection systems. The same radio wave principles that had tracked German bombers across the English Channel could potentially revolutionize weather forecasting, air traffic control, and maritime navigation for commercial vessels operating in peacetime conditions. Whitfield's first civilian radar project involved developing storm tracking capabilities for British meteorologists. The massive rotating antenna arrays that emerged from her team's research bore little resemblance to the fixed transmission towers of wartime chain home stations. But the underlying physics remained identical. Radio pulses transmitted into approaching weather systems would reflect off raindrops and ice crystals, creating detailed maps of precipitation patterns dozens of miles before storms reached populated areas. This represented an enormous improvement over traditional weather prediction methods that relied primarily on barometric pressure measurements and visual observation of cloud formations. The commercial aviation industry embraced radar technology with remarkable enthusiasm. Captain David Thornton, flying passenger routes between London and Edinburgh in 1947, described radar-equipped control towers as revolutionary safety improvements that eliminated the terrifying experience of attempting instrument landings during heavy fog or snowstorms. Air traffic controllers could now track multiple aircraft simultaneously, maintaining safe separation distances and providing precise approach guidance under visibility conditions that would have grounded all flights just a few years earlier. Maritime applications proved equally transformative for commercial shipping operations. The cargo vessel SS Manchester, equipped with one of Britain's first commercial marine radar systems in 1948, completed a North Atlantic crossing during exceptionally heavy fog without reducing speed or altering course. Captain William Hayes reported that his radar operator could distinguish between other ships, icebergs, and coastal features at distances exceeding 20 miles, providing navigation capabilities that surpassed traditional celestial navigation techniques even under perfect weather conditions. The scientific research community quickly recognized radar's potential for exploring previously inaccessible frontiers. Astronomer Dr. Rachel Pemberton established one of the world's first radio telescope facilities in Cheshire during 1949, using modified radar equipment to detect radio waves emitted by distant celestial objects. Her initial observations revealed that the universe contained powerful radio sources completely invisible to conventional optical telescopes, opening entirely new fields of astronomical research that continue expanding human understanding of cosmic phenomena. Medical applications emerged somewhat unexpectedly during the early 1950s, when hospital technicians noticed that radar equipment could detect internal body structures under certain experimental conditions. Dr. Martin Crawford, working at Edinburgh University's Medical Research Laboratory, developed techniques for using controlled radio wave pulses to examine internal organs without surgical intervention. These early experiments laid the groundwork for modern medical imaging technologies that enable doctors to diagnose conditions and monitor treatments with unprecedented precision and safety. The Korean conflict demonstrated radar's continued military relevance under conditions vastly different from the Battle of Britain. Technical Sergeant Linda Rodriguez operated mobile radar units that could be transported by truck and deployed within hours to provide early warning coverage for advancing Allied forces. These portable systems represented significant technological advances over the massive fixed installations of chain home stations, offering comparable detection ranges with equipment that could be packed into several transport vehicles rather than requiring permanent concrete foundations and enormous steel transmission towers. Industrial applications multiplied rapidly throughout the 1950s as manufacturing companies discovered radar's utility for quality control and production monitoring. The Rolls-Royce aircraft engine factory in Derby installed radar-based measurement systems that could detect microscopic surface irregularities on turbine blades during the manufacturing process. This level of precision quality control had been impossible using traditional mechanical inspection methods, contributing to significant improvements in engine reliability and performance across both military and civilian aviation applications. Agricultural researchers developed radar techniques for monitoring crop conditions across vast farming regions. Dr. Jennifer Walsh conducted experiments from small aircraft equipped with specialized radar systems that could distinguish between healthy vegetation and areas affected by drought, disease, or insect damage. Farmers could identify problems affecting their crops weeks before visual symptoms became apparent, enabling more effective treatment and significantly reducing agricultural losses due to undetected plant health issues. The development of transistor technology during the late 1950s revolutionized radar capabilities by replacing the bulky vacuum tubes that had powered wartime systems. Engineer Robert Clark, formerly part of Watson Watt's original research team, led efforts to miniaturize radar components while simultaneously improving their reliability and reducing power consumption. These advances made radar technology accessible to smaller organizations and specialized applications that could never have afforded the massive electrical requirements of earlier systems. Space exploration programs adopted radar as an essential tool for tracking rockets and spacecraft throughout their missions. The launch of Sputnik in 1957 was monitored by radar stations across the globe, demonstrating the technology's ability to detect and track objects moving at unprecedented speeds through the vacuum of space. NASA subsequently developed specialized radar systems for guiding spacecraft during critical maneuvers such as lunar landings and orbital rendezvous operations. Law enforcement agencies began experimenting with radar speed detection equipment during the 1960s, leading to widespread deployment of traffic monitoring systems that could accurately measure vehicle speeds from concealed locations. Police officer Sarah Mitchell, operating one of the first mobile radar units in Hampshire, noted that drivers quickly modified their behavior when they became aware that their speeds could be monitored electronically rather than relying solely on visual observation by patrol officers. The aviation industry's adoption of weather radar transformed commercial flight safety by enabling pilots to navigate around dangerous thunderstorms and turbulence zones. Captain Michael Thompson, flying transatlantic routes during the 1960s, described onboard weather radar as revolutionary technology that eliminated much of the uncertainty and risk associated with flying through areas of potential severe weather. Passengers experienced smoother, safer flights, while airlines reduced delays and cancellations caused by adverse weather conditions. Modern radar applications extend far beyond the original military early warning role, envisioned by Robert Watson Watt and his engineering team during the desperate summer of 1940. Contemporary air traffic control systems manage thousands of simultaneous flights across global airspace networks, ensuring safe and efficient transportation for millions of passengers annually. Weather forecasting accuracy has improved dramatically through the use of sophisticated Doppler radar networks that can detect tornado formation, track hurricane development, and provide precise precipitation predictions for agricultural and urban planning purposes. Medical imaging technologies derived from radar principles enable doctors to perform non-invasive examinations of internal organs, monitor fetal development during pregnancy, and guide surgical procedures with millimeter precision. Automotive safety systems use radar sensors to detect potential collision hazards and automatically apply brakes or adjust steering to prevent accidents. Smart city infrastructure incorporates radar monitoring for traffic flow optimization, parking space management, and pedestrian safety at busy intersections. The fundamental principles discovered by those brilliant British engineers during their race against time have evolved into technologies that touch virtually every aspect of modern life, from the smartphone navigation systems that guide daily commutes to the deep space exploration missions that extend human knowledge to distant planets. The invisible radio waves that once protected Britain against aerial invasion continue expanding the boundaries of what humanity can achieve through innovative engineering and unwavering determination to solve seemingly impossible challenges.